The Heads Up podcast is brought to you by USA Wrestling, the National Coaches Council, the National Coaches Education Program, and the Greg Strobel Leadership Academy. Let's get to the show.
Hello, everybody. Mike Haggerty here, along with Michael Clayton and our Heads Up podcast today. And man, we have some special guests with us today. I'm so excited to have you guys here. We've got Marlin Grahn and Scott Sisson and Tony Champion. And if those names don't ring a bell, it's because we're all older, and but they have
really old.
We're really, really old. But I'm so excited because we're going to get into some of the details, and I don't want to steal the thunder, but Marlin was a longtime coach at Portland State, and of course Tony and James wrestled for I think I might have said Scott, but James wrestled for Portland State back in the day, and had tremendous careers. And so we're going to really get into the depths and the weeds of what that program was like back in the day, and how these guys were able to accomplish something that's never been accomplished, probably in the sport of wrestling and maybe in any other sport for that matter. So we'll get into the details in just a minute. But guys, first of all, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And Michael, good to see you again, brother. We just finished up with the Coaches College up at World Team Trials. What a special event that one was.
Yeah, I have not recovered at all from the sleep or from the concussion I got running into my mom's garage door on the way home. So I'm probably not going to be a whole lot of activity today, but I'm excited to just be a fly on the wall for this one because it was great. We had over 40 coaches at the Silver College in Coralville. And just some amazing stuff that we had an opportunity to talk about. Like talked about some vulnerability, right, which is a tough thing for a lot of us. I'm sure, back in '89, coach probably wasn't like, hey, guys, if you have any thing you'd like to be vulnerable about, come on and talk to me. And
Yeah.
A different mindset, probably.
Yeah, a lot different mindset today. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting to just see how those different things kind of play into coaching. So we had a great clinic. So many folks that help out with that clinic is what makes it great. Coach Haggerty, we had some clinicians get delayed by flight issues, and he's like, yeah, I got my shoes, and he's on like teaching a session on the mat, and something else happens, and he's teaching a classroom session, and Dr. Charlotte Bailey out of Iowa came in and did a DEI class for us that just opened a lot of eyes, and just a really cool week.
I saw the pictures of that. It looked like there was a lot of top quality people in that meeting.
It really was, and we had one group from Wisconsin. It was 3 brothers and the father. There's 4 from the same family that got to do that. I've never seen it or heard of that, all at one Silver College. So just really some neat stuff.
Well, kudos to you, Mike, for putting it on. Without your leadership, this certainly wouldn't be taking place. And having an opportunity to work with those 40 coaches or however many were there was absolutely fantastic. And it was an enjoyable experience for myself. But I also feel like just from the communication on, post clinic has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you for what you do and continue to do in the coaches education world. So
honored. Thanks.
All right, back to our honored guest for today. Man, again, I don't even know where to begin, but let's just start. Marlin, you've been around the block a while, man, and you wrestled at Portland State, got the opportunity to coach there for several years, won national championships. You got to coach these 2 guys. Give us a little bit of a story about where you've come from. And how you've continued to stay in the sport of wrestling and what it means to you to be involved in this great sport of wrestling.
For myself, I started wrestling in high school as a freshman. A man named Jim Smith pulled me off the basketball court and said, you should be a wrestler. I don't know why I thought that with my build. I was about 88 pounds. But anyway, the interesting part of that is Jim Smith was also Larry Owens' coach when he beat Gable.
Oh.
And so that was kind of and he also wrestled at Portland State before in the 50s. So anyway, then I wrestled in the Army and wrestled for the Multnomah Athletic Club. I had some interesting teammates, the Hayeswinkle brothers and Hank Shank. And, so that was, I just actually, this last summer, I hooked up with Jim and Dave Hazewinkle, both. So
how did you go from Marlin, from the position of athlete at Portland State and then became the head coach at Portland State? Was there any particular segue that took place going into that, or how did that develop?
Well, Don Conway, I had Howard Westcott as a coach for 2 years. Don Conway came and was a coach for 2 years. And then I was an assistant coach for Don Conway, and then he left. And then I was an assistant coach to Len Kauffman. And he was a full-time professor and coach, and it was really tough. And he told the athletic department that if they would hire me full-time, or Marlin, he said, then he would stay. If he didn't, he was going to quit. And they didn't hire me, and so he quit in the middle of the season.
Wow.
So.
And what year was that, Marlin?
83.
83. That's the same year that I had the opportunity to start coaching at Central Missouri State. The same year, 83. So I knew our time periods parallel pretty closely, and I had a chance to watch those powerhouses that you built with James and Tony and a bunch of other guys. So with that said, you other two guys, you wrestled for him. Tell us a little bit about what got you started in the sport of wrestling, and then having the opportunity to compete for a powerhouse such as Portland State back in the day.
Well,
go ahead, Tony.
Yeah. So I had the opportunity when I was a senior in high school. I transferred from Ashland High School, which is where I live now, my hometown, Ashland, Oregon, to Eagle Point, which is about 30 miles away, to wrestle for a guy named Bob Bergen. Bob Bergen was Marlin's teammate at Portland State back in the 70s. As a matter of fact, Marlin and Bergen were both second in the U.S. Open. What year was that, Marlin? Like 78, 79? Somewhere in there together?
73.
73. Oh, I was off a little bit. But so I was coached by Bob Bergen, who was Marlin's teammate. And at Eagle Point that year, we won a state championship as the team, and I won an individual state title. And I was kind of a late bloomer, but I was being recruited by a lot of schools. And it came down really to Oregon and Portland State. And I'd visited Oregon State, and at that time, I didn't feel like that was going to be a fit. But I was really liking Oregon and Portland State. And I didn't really know a lot about Portland State at that time. But it really came down to this. And this ended up being Marlin's greatest recruiting season of all time. They called it the Four Horsemen because he signed 4 state champions out of the 1988 class in the AAA, which back in those days, 3A state in Oregon was legit. It was kind of the California state championship. It was really just, that was the state championship. But when it came down to, and this is literally how it happened, I was at my house in Eagle Point, Oregon, and Marlin was on his way down. He was the only coach that came to my house. He literally came to my house down from Portland. And as he was pulling into the driveway, Chuck Kearney and Ron Finley were on the phone going, "Don't sign. Don't sign. We're going to get you some more money. We know Marlin's coming down, but don't sign." And Marlin came into the house, and guess what? I signed. I was like, I was a kid, down from Southern Oregon, and I had a big-time college coach come into my house. He's the only one that came to my house, and he came, and I signed right then and there. And at that time, I knew that, Dan Russell, who was really legitimately his senior year in 1986, was probably the #1 recruit in the entire nation. And he went to Portland State, and he was a national champion his freshman year. And then he had an injury. I knew that Travis West, who was another big name out of Oregon back in, Travis West, of course, was one of our teammates, ended up being on the 92 Olympic team. But he was already on the team as a national champion. But that's kind of how I got to Portland State. And at that time, everybody today is like, oh, Division I, Division II. Well, and as we can get into this podcast a little bit more and understand what Portland State truly was, even though at that time we were in the Division II for the national championship, we were a legitimate Division I team that wrestled nothing but Division I teams throughout the entire season. We didn't see a Division II team really until the Western Regionals and Nationals. And in my freshman year at Oregon, or at Portland State, our first duel, we opened against University of Oregon. And then I think our next competition, I think we were in Las Vegas. And then the third competition, we were at Arizona State dueling the defending Division I champions, and you don't see that much. And we can go and we'll talk about the Oklahoma State duels later in the years, but that was our season. And then not only would we run, and I'll let Marlin go into this a little bit more, but not only when we go to those schools would we duel. When we were at Arizona State that year, we were 118 to 150 was going against Arizona State, the defending national champions, and 158 through heavyweight was wrestling against Oklahoma. And we were dueling them simultaneously as a Division II team. And then later that night, those two would duel in the big duel at night. So, but anyway, that's how I got to Portland State. I'm not going to steal all the glory. Let James talk here now. Go ahead, James. Tell him your story about getting in.
One thing before James jumps in, I'm going to reach out to Chuck Carney. Chuck lives in the area, and I want to make sure that I write him on this one because if anybody that knows Chuck loves to visit. And so I'm going to have a few things to say to him about how he lost Tony Champion.
Well, he was now you got to remember that was his first year as an assistant because that was the year before his senior year. He was the recruiter. There's no doubt about it that Chuck was the recruiter in Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I will admit the best recruiting trip I had was at the University of Oregon. That was a lot of fun. Chuck knows how to show. He knows how to get you in there and want to. There's no doubt about it. Well, but it really came down to that. I mean, honestly, and that you have to attribute that to Marlin Grahn. Is like he went down. I mean, that was before college coaches went to kids' houses. Now it's like common thing. But back in the late '80s, coaches didn't do that type of thing. And Marlin really went the extra. And of course, Howard Westcott. We haven't talked about Howard Westcott, but Howard Westcott was still around back in those days. And I haven't talked about my trip to, but there's always the old Howard Westcott stories. I've heard so many now from Bob Bergen, but Howard, Dr. Westcott was, that was Marlin's coach. And before I went to Portland State, you always hear about the stories about Howard Westcott. He'd be like, don't sit next to him because he coughs and he wipes his hand on your back. And that's the story you heard. I'm like, oh, and I'll never forget, we're up at the Oregon Open at the Portland State gym and Howard sits next to me in the stands. And I'm like, oh my God. And he sits next to me, goes, hey, I just want you to know, don't worry about the money. We're going to make sure we get you the money to get up here. And that was the only conversation I think I ever had with Howard Westcott. And of course, he wasn't even the coach back then. But that's kind of that's how that kind of went down.
Tony, it sounds like that personal connection, right? For Marlin to have shown the effort to show up at your home and make that personal connection. It sounds like that was kind of the big difference. And
yeah, absolutely. Literally, like I say, you especially when you talk about, the sport of wrestling, you think about it was legitimately that. It was Marlin making that trip down, to Southern Oregon. Now in our old age, Marlin, he comes down all the time. We play golf, but and he makes that trip down. But back in that day, that was it. And I had made that decision. I said, well, the coach that wants to, and I kind of attribute everything to that in life today. Somebody's going to make that extra effort and commitment to you like that. They're going to make that 4.5, 5 hour drive down. Whatever difference it could have been in scholarship money or whatever it was, or the program, that was somebody that wanted you on their team. So that's that right there. There was, as soon as he stepped in the door, he didn't have to say anything to me. I was going to sign. And it just happened to be really, but it's just a great story. I literally tell that story because it's the truth. Finley, and I've told Marlin this, Finley and Kearney were on the phone with me. Don't sign with Marlin. We know he's coming down there, but don't sign.
Well, hey, bouncing it back, James, tell us, sort of the same, what brought you in and how did you get hooked into the Portland State train?
Well, I grew up in Milwaukee, Oregon, which is about 15 miles south of Portland. Wrestled for Jim Gadberry, and then later Dan Williamson was my coach there. I think Marlin the Magician was what got me. He was famous for doing his magic tricks, and his name is Tony. He kind of hung around at tournaments. He came up and talked to me. I had a similar deal. I had an offer with Oregon State for a full ride, but I didn't like the coach. Dale Thomas was a little bit older and a little bit stricter, and I also didn't like the idea of living in Corvallis. You know, I was a Portland kid. I had grown up in Portland and wrestled through the juniors all the way up through high school, and that was my home. You know, so to have the opportunity to wrestle from home and to stay locally, you know, in my house was big to me. Also, you got to give Marlin props for his recruiting. Like Tony said, he picked 4 of the 13 weight classes. He picked the state champions that year and recruited him into our class. So obviously the magic tricks were working.
Yeah, and I'll say of those 4, they in the Portland State in the press release or our wrestling magazine that year, they put us in there as the 4 horsemen, and it was kind of funny. Well, in the way that it turned out, of those 4 recruits, and you know, and all 4 of these guys, or including myself, we were legitimate division. We could have all wrestled Division I, every one of us. There's no problem. We all had scholarships to Division I programs. Okay, and that's the funny. People, do you say something like that today to people? They're like, oh, well, how could that happen? Well, back in those days, it wasn't the same. We all wrestled each other. We all had the same respect for one another. But I was
too was, you know, Dan and Travis were still able to go to the Division I tournaments, so they had changed the rule the year before. So Marlin did kind of tell me that maybe they were going to let us in, and maybe they were going to change the rule back, and they were still petitioning to try and let us Division II champions travel on and wrestle in the Division I tournament. So that was a big part of it for me.
Yeah, that was a big one too. And, you know, it was kind of hard. Even in my weight class, the guy who got second to me, he was allowed to go on, and he was a Division I All-American. The guy who I beat 3 times. And, you know, and so those are little things that came up. But in the reality of it, you know, did we never get to wrestle in that show? Yeah, but we wrestled everybody, no matter what, throughout the season. We got to see everybody, and so we had
what would that kind of competition, with that kind of schedule, being around? I mean, you guys, like you say, you had 5 of the best on the team, and you had one of the best coaches going. But how did that level consistently? How did that bring you guys together? I mean, the 5 of you at that level. How did that bring you together?
Well, I mean, again, you have to give Marlin some credit here because he was so entrenched in wrestling and had worked his way up. He knew Bobby Douglas. He knew all the coaches from all these schools. So he would set up these killer schedules. I mean, really killer schedules that a lot of D1 teams wouldn't even dare to put on. You know, we never had an easy match. And by the end of the year, you know, going to D2s was easy. You know, I don't want to say it was easy, but we were it was nothing really, because we had wrestled such good competition throughout the year. I remember being down at that Las Vegas tournament. So it was the night before the Las Vegas tournament. We flew in early and dual meet at Arizona State, and I got thrown around by Junior Saunders, who was a grown man, and I was an 18-year-old boy. That was a rude awakening to me. It's like,
we got thrown in it. Yeah,
at that point, and I was, like I said, just fresh off the boat, 18-year-old kid, and that toughened you up real quick. You know,
I think James and Tony both, and Marlin, I know that you can attest to this, that the truth of the matter is D2 back then, especially the higher level programs, SIU Edwardsville, Eastern Illinois, Portland State, Cal Bakersfield. You just brought up Junior Saunders, but Junior Saunders started out at Cal Bakersfield, and he was a D2 guy as well. And of course, he followed. You know, he jumped ship and went over to D1 and wrestled at Arizona State. But you make the point that D2 back in the day, when they could advance into the Division I tournament, I had an opportunity to coach a young man by the name of Mark Burrell, who was a 2-time national champ for me.
I remember Mark.
Yeah, Mark was a 130. What would the weight class been back in the day? 30.
Yeah, 34.
Well, I think Mark was a champ the same year of the 89 team.
Yeah, Mark was at 26. Mark wrestled 126 and went on and wrestled, and he lost in the blood round actually to an Arizona State wrestler. And so I definitely remember those days, and it does speak to how powerful Division II actually was. And Marlin, what you were doing was sort of the model of obviously placing these guys under tougher and tougher competition throughout the year. So when D2 rolled around, that the national tournament lightened up a little bit. So Marlin, any thoughts on that? What was your insight on that back in the day when you were making those schedules out to have the, I guess, the foresight at that moment?
It was like, whoa.
Yeah, I was going to say to torture us.
To me, that was because I do remember like SIU Edwardsville took on Iowa University and gave them a fit in a duel about this same time that you guys were winning the national championship.
I just watched that duel on YouTube. It was I think it was 87. Yeah, I watched that duel. It was pretty amazing, actually.
Tim Wright, I can't remember who he wrestled, but he gave whoever was at 118 for Iowa at that time a heck of a match. And it's just like all of these back in the day, it was like the lens was pretty blurred in regards to what D2 and D1 actually looked like.
Well, with that training, that's a pretty intense schedule. Is there like I'm sure the strategy behind it, is there a way to protect your athletes when they're 18 and they walk into the Cliff Keen Las Vegas Open, or like, how does that work?
Well, it's kind of started with Anthony Amato. I want to go back that far.
Oh yeah.
When we got Anthony, we had some good teams early on before that with other people before I was a head coach. But anyway, Anthony became our first guy that come and was legitimate, and he brought Travis and then Hyde Brown and that really set us up for these other guys to say, why not go there? And training wise, I believed in active rest days. When I thought they were too beat up, I would try and have them do basketball. I tried to make them. The only rule was, and wrestlers in baskall is ugly.
Yeah,
I had one
we
rule.
were just good basketball players, Marlin, as wrestlers by the end.
The only rule I had was no jumping. You couldn't jump.
I like
and
it.
The only guy that jumped was 6'8" and sprained his ankle. Ryan Crosby. The only guy that didn't have to jump and sprained his ankle. But anyway, I believe in active rest. I believe in live wrestling. And I wasn't one of those coaches that talked a lot. It's just we had great kids, and I had guys show us their moves. What move? James Sisson was a rider. People were scared to get underneath James. On Tony, everybody knew that he was just so solid.
Crotch.
He was going to hit the high crotch. I don't care what you do. And we had Dan Russell. And the funny thing is, Dan Russell, there's only one school he lost every year to. Simon Fraser. Never beat a Simon Fraser kid.
Wow.
But that guy was legit.
No,
that kid was like, he was an Olympiad.
It was 4 different guys.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Yeah. Those guys, well, you got to remember back then, like I used to wrestle Abdu, so Abdu was like their 2-time Olympiad. He was a 4-time NAIA champ, and Abdu and I tied every time. Yeah. And it was, but the Simon Fraser was legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
They had world-class wrestlers on their team,
Yeah, we drove all the way up to the Canadian border to wrestle them one year and slept in a gym halfway, on the other side of Seattle.
Oh, that's right. We did.
He was very frugal.
That's putting it nicely, James.
That's how we were able to go everywhere.
People's houses at the tournaments. They would like take 2 or 3 wrestlers to each guy's house. to save money on hotel rooms.
No, yeah, that's how we did it. Yeah.
We
You know
slept in the gym at Eagle Point when we went down to Tony's hometown.
Oh yeah. We split with some of our grandparents' house, and then we had some in Eagle Point, and we spread everybody around. Hey, one thing that I wanted to get back to before we got away from it is the schedule, and it was the real schedule that was an amazing one. And Marlin, I sent that to you like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
It was the 1991 schedule. And that was the year that we were defending. No, it was the 90 schedule, because that was the year we were defending Division II champs, and Oklahoma State was the defending Division I champ. And that season was incredibly. If you look at that schedule, we wrestled.
They came to our house that year.
Yeah, we wrestled the top 10 in Division I that year, and Oklahoma State came to our house. And when they came to our tournament, which is the Oregon Classic, which used to be a premier tournament, they came and wrestled in our tournament, but they also dueled us the night before the tournament. Now, when they came to Oregon, they didn't wrestle Oregon. They didn't wrestle Oregon State, the two Division I teams. They came into our house and dueled us. And now this is the crazy part. And Marlin's corrected me on this, but Travis West didn't wrestle that night, and we still split 5-for-5 matches, and we lost to them on points.
I got a funny story about
and
that.
And so if Dan Russell, it was Pat Smith, the first 4-time NCAA champ. It was Pat Smith's first match ever, and Dan Russell pinned him. Okay. And then I won at the last few seconds. Sisson beat who was that All-American you beat?
Number 2 ranked guy in the country. That's all I remember. And every time we scrambled, every time we rolled over, and it ended up beating him like 15-3.
It was crazy. And the gym was going nuts.
And they were like, well, how do you feel, Sisson? And I'm like, well, I just beat the number 2 guy in the nation. I'm the greatest. I'm not going to lose anymore this year.
I'll never forget that.
The nationals or the regionals. And then the next day, I wrestled the same kid in the Oregon Wrestling Classic that Tony was talking about. And the guy picked me up, and they show a picture of him slamming me on my head. And they cut it from me going, I'm the greatest, and Sisson comes back down to earth today. And show me just getting railed right on the top.
I never forget that. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
15 minutes of fame on the Oregon broadcast news.
What James said, though, his one line was, what did you say? If you're going to sit your foot in your mouth, make sure you got a big enough mouth.
Yeah, no, if you're going to open your mouth, make sure it's big enough to accommodate your foot. Sometimes that happens. And he ended up beating me at the Oregon Classic, but it was 7-3 or 7-2. He got his revenge. So, but I tell that story all the time. That's, like I said, the one time I got on the news was to get clowned.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny how ego gets this?
But you can only imagine that schedule. So that was, they came and wrestled us. That same year, we wrestled Arizona State again, but this time we wrestled them and Iowa State at the same time. We wrestled Nebraska and we wrestled
Virginia duels.
Yeah, I mean, we wrestled Oklahoma, we wrestled Minnesota. Everybody. Those are the teams we dueled. We didn't duel any Division II team at all. We did duel Southern Oregon. Back in those days, SOU Southern Oregon was really good. They'd have good guys on there, and we'd duel them. But we would wrestle Oregon twice a year, Oregon State twice a year, every year. Just like a regular schedule, and that's how it was back in those days. And but yeah, it was. But that year was an incredibly difficult schedule. It was and plus James and I were both sophomores, so you get that sophomore-itis. You think you're a national champion coming into a season like that. You take some licks and come out the other end of it. That's for sure.
I remember Tony got choked out at the Virginia duels.
Yes,
the guy had a front choke.
You gotta bring that one up. Well, I'll bring this up
when he's moving, and then the next thing you know, he doesn't move, and his arms go limp. The referee apparently didn't.
I'll tell you that story. And he was a legit wrestler.
Over and pinned him, without even.
I did. I got pinned. That was Corey Olson from Nebraska. I think he ended up getting second that
like
year.
30 seconds
But
later, like what?
I was beating him by like 7 points. And the whole I'll never forget it. I thought the match was over. And there was like 10 or 15 seconds left on the clock. And the whole match, he'd been trying to get over the top of me to get a lock and a headlock.
We lost Tony.
Oh, no. I'm guessing
Just in the middle of the story. Let's anticipate that he'll be back with us. I know he's up in the mountains. We didn't mention that earlier in the broadcast, but he kind of dicey in regards to his signal. But man, these are some amazing stories, and it just speaks to the amount of the relationship and the tightness of this particular team or teams, Marlin, that you had back in the day. And I've got a few notes over on the side of my screen here because I remember these are a few others. I mean, we've got James, we've got Tony on here, but we've briefly gone through and mentioned Dan Russell. I mean, look what Dan's career has meant to Portland State and certainly even the United States and what he accomplished. We've briefly mentioned Travis West, Hyde Brown, Anthony Amata. The list goes on of some of these guys that you had in your stable during those times between 83 and I guess it would have been like 91. But the big thing is like for me as a coach is, as much as these guys were successful, the schedule that you did put together, Marlin, and having the anticipation to get those D1 programs on the schedule, to me, it speaks to the insight that you had back in the day, because even with those kind of guys that you had there, I'm not sure that most coaches would have sought those individuals out or those teams out to compete against.
Well, one of the things I kind of told the guys coming in was that we were going to have a tough schedule. And it wasn't going to, they weren't going to be lacking in their competition. And it was just going to, that was one of the questions they had, who are we going to wrestle? And, I just said, it's going to be a tough schedule as much as I can do. And we had some good kids already, and for these guys that when they came, the Four Horsemen, they were the Four Horsemen. They were, two of them didn't end up staying with us for different reasons, but they were very good wrestlers and could have been exceptional wrestlers. They just kind of moved on, and one played football, and the other who was
Clay.
Clay. He went down to Southern Oregon and finished. So,
but Clay ended up being second in the nation still, though. He was a national finalist.
Our 190-pounder Clay Woodward could have been the 6th champion that year if he hadn't blown his knee out. His senior year at the state tournament, I think he blew his knee out, or shortly thereafter in the freestyle or Greco tournament, he blew his knee out and was redshirting that year. But he had a legitimate chance to be, a D2 national champion as well. So it could have been 6.
Tony and Clay wrestled every day, and nobody got a takedown most of the time. It was just amazing. I mean, Clay was long and lanky, and Tony was short and powerful, different people, but Clay was a powerful human being.
Yeah, Clay is Clay's one of those guys that was just a super tough human being. How you can come across people that are just extraordinarily tough human beings in a sport of wrestling. You know that when you grab a hold of them. And that's the thing, you go back to I get off subject here about our competition schedule, but our wrestling room was immensely talented. I mean, there's a lot of guys that came in through those rooms. Some of them never got on the mat for some reason, but there was a lot of talent that came through that wrestling room. A lot of guys that wanted to be on that team. And I mean, you think about some of the wrestle-offs that went off, like the wrestle-offs with Herrera and Travis, and Joey won our tournament, the Oregon Classic one year, and a year that Minnesota and Oklahoma were there, so Joey was a tough guy, but he never really got in the lineup that much because of Travis West and Dan kind of in those places. But
no, actually, that was me.
Was that you that was not?
Took his spot at 142 in the wrestle.
Oh, did you? Oh, I thought it was a 58 pounder. Oh, he must have had to wrestle up those times.
Yeah, he went up once I beat him.
But you see that attitude? That's the attitude that was always that kind of that toughness attitude. That kind of just was across all the way from the bottom up. We had a lot of big guys that came through that wrestling room too. A lot of big guys, and then we get another thing. But before regional training centers were a thing. Really, Portland State was kind of a regional training center because you would, especially for the Greco side, because Marlin talks about Amato. Anthony was on the '88 Olympic team. You had Travis that was on the '92 team. Russell was always kind of right in there as an alternate. Broderick was always right in there. But we had a lot of Greco talent that was coming through there on a regular basis, wanting to work out with those guys. So even before, everybody was at Olympic, training center, Portland State was kind of one of those things. You get guys that come through the workout there all the time.
What was it about Greco in your area? Greco in your area. I mean, with you guys and Dan Russell and Matt Lindland, like that area.
Yeah, Lindland was in our wrestling room a lot. Because he was at Clackamas community when he started out. And so Clackamas would come up. And in reality, kind of Clackamas was almost kind of a Portland State farm team back in the day. But we had many, many, many joint practices with those guys. Lindland was in our room a lot. The Greco aspect in Portland really kind of comes from the USA Wrestling and the Peninsula Club. Cale Sanders was or not Kel Sanders, but Kel Sonnen came out of Peninsula. He was a Greco guy. And, a lot of those guys, who are the little brothers that came up that Oscar and
Woods?
Oscar Woods, Isaac Woods.
Isaac, that were, I think Oscar was, you got the Naradka brothers, Glenn was on the world, he was on wrestle for the Army and the world class athlete program for years. He's an Olympic alternate. And then you had a lot of those guys. What's that?
Where was Pavel Kotzen training in that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. Is that Pavel actually came in and he was a coach at USA Oregon Wrestling. Yeah, which is Coach Sprague out there. And that's kind of where all that Greco kind of came in. Was Pavel. Like I was exposed to Pavel when I was probably 14 years old, and he was obviously an Olympic wrestling coach But I think that's really where it all kind of comes into is that's where that all started really was Peninsula Wrestling with Roy Pittman and then Coach Sprague out there at USA Rep, who are both still coaching and producing, these top level athletes. So you got Walksmith's son. Do you see that, Marlin? I think he got third at the seniors.
We're watching it.
So he's become a contender. It's and I'm going to say one other thing, and then I'll shut up because I like to talk, obviously. But
did you guys see Uriah Faber get beat in Vegas?
No, I didn't see that. Did he get beat
by Glenn Garrison?
No way, really?
Glenn beat him 11-0.
Oh, that's pretty good. Wrestling's a little different conditioning, across the board. But I want to say, this is one other thing, and this is kind of Marlin's philosophy. Okay, in coaching, we were getting ready to duel Boise State. This was a home match. I don't remember what year. I think might have been my junior year. And Marlin goes, well, it doesn't look like they got a 77-pounder, but we still want you to make weigh in and take the forfeit. I'm like, okay, great. And at that time, Mike Davies was an assistant coach there. And Davies, if you guys remember way back, he was second in the NCAAs for Arizona State at 190 pounds. And at that time, he was training for the world teams. And but he was an assistant coach at Boise State. So Marlon goes, well, what I want you to do is, for the crowd, as they're starting to come in before the duel, since you don't have a match, you and Mike are going to go out and wrestle, for an hour before the duel. And I'm like, okay, I might mess with Mike. I don't have him wrestle a match. You guys know who Mike is. He's a monster, right? So me and Mike are out there wrestling hard for an hour. I mean, we're going at it. He's in top condition. I'm in pretty good shape. I'm thinking, pretty good time. People are coming in. We're out there, and we wrestle all the way up to the duel. And we get they call up, everybody's lining up, getting the lineup. I get my stuff on, get ready to go out, take my forfeit. And they get out there and they send a guy out on me. I don't know who it was, but I don't know if that was Marlin was in on that, or that was just Boise State or whatever it was. But I went through all that, going out to take my forfeit, and they sent a guy out on me. I beat him. But they sent a guy out on me. That was like wow, okay. But that's that's kind of that training mindset. You got to be ready to go at all times. I mean, I left everything on the mat that hour before the duel, but it still happened. So
it was just it was a long warm up. It's all
it was a long warm up with a really good guy.
Hey, I have to ask you. I'm sorry, Mike. I'll go ahead if you want, but
go.
Before we get too far into this, I alluded earlier in the podcast that we would talk about the year that was so special that you were able to do something that in my mind was absolutely historic. And I'm a coach that has a kid that's wins a national title, and I'm also in awe of what I'm seeing taking place at the D2 championships. And
never happened to me before.
It was mind-boggling. And so, like I said, we alluded to this earlier in the podcast. I want you guys to expand on what actually took place in '89, and the significance of it, I think, is just, to me, has always been overlooked and should have been celebrated time and time again in our wrestling community, and even outside of wrestling. To me, that's sort of like those special events that you just don't ever hear about happening. And that was the 5 for 5. So can you talk a little bit about that group?
And for the listeners, talk about like what happened, right? Can we get the end result, and then we can go back to the story? Because a lot of folks probably don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, Mike.
Yeah, we brought 5 guys out of 10 weight classes to the tournament, and all 5 of us won. We never lost a match. We didn't have to sit through any consolations to root on our team, any consolation rounds. We all went and we all won. And like I said, I've never had that happen at any tournament I've ever been at before or since. I've never seen that.
And James, correct me if I'm wrong, but not everybody was favored to win, though you had a great team. There were freshmen on that team. There were guys that were just, granted, they were probably going to be.
I think I was like a 3rd or 4th seed.
Yeah.
Maybe a 5th seed. I mean, I was not supposed to be. Well, I wasn't supposed to be at 134 pounds either. So
That's another story.
I had wrestled at 142 all year, and Travis was at 150, and Dan was at 158. And then 2 weeks before the regionals, they decided that they were going to drop down. Dan was going to drop down to 150. Travis dropped down to 142. And I challenged him, and he busted my head and threw me around like a rag doll. So at that point, I either had a decision, I mean, I had a good season. I had placed 5th at the Las Vegas tournament, won probably 80% of my matches that year against tough competition. But I faced a decision, I was either cut down to 134 pounds or call it a year. And my walking around weight was like 145 pounds, and I probably only had 5% body fat. So there wasn't a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak, to drop, but I wasn't ready to be done. I wasn't ready to just call it a season and quit. There was no quit. So I actually ran up the hill back behind Portland State in the Southwest Hills every night up to the Chart House restaurant. It's like 3 miles up and 3 miles back down, just to have a bite of food for dinner, and worked off the weight little by little just to make it, because I didn't want to not be a part of that team. I didn't want to get left at home and watch all my teammates and let Tony get all the glory.
Well, that's an important part of the story, because if you hadn't made that weight, there would only have been 4, and you never really know what the dynamics would have really turned out to be. But it was just like James was saying, it was absolutely incredible. Kind of that first round momentum. You get into a national champion, and you had 2 freshmen, myself and James. Broderick was a sophomore. Dan was a sophomore. Travis was a junior.
Yeah.
Okay. And you get into that to national tournament. You don't know, even though we've had that tough tournament, James and I as freshmen, psychologically, we're at a college national tournament. You know, we don't know we haven't seen any of these guys. We don't know how tough they are. We're just
wide-eyed kids. Yeah, we lost Tony again, so I'll keep going with the story. So I mean, as the round went on and each of us won, it was kind of like none of us wanted to lose because we didn't want to be the first one to lose. You know what I mean? You're looking at your teammates, you're thinking, man, I don't want to be the one that loses. I don't want to be the one that goes into that consolation round. Round after round, it just kept building and building. I think. What's up?
You felt that building as the rounds happened.
Oh yeah, because it was like we didn't want to be the first one to lose, and the five of us were all very competitive guys, and me and Tony especially coming in together, we were always competitive, and we didn't want to be the first one to lose a match because if you lose a match, then your teammates have to go to the consolation round and watch you wrestle. And I didn't want, that to happen.
Let me tell you, I'm going to tell you right now, because I was the 177-pounder. I was the last guy to wrestle every round. And let me tell you, that pressure mounted every round on me. And I think probably the biggest, even more than the finals round, was the semifinals pressure on me was like super tremendous because I had a legit guy. You know, this guy named Joe Wypazinski out of UNI, who was the D1 All-American. His only 3 losses at the national championships for 3 years in a row, where he lost to me in the semis that year and then twice in the finals. So this guy was legit. And there was a lot of pressure. And I recently, within the last year or so, I went back and watched the video of that semifinal match, and that ref didn't want me to win. I mean, I got like 2 penalty points against me. I'm like, what? Even today, I'm going, what was that? And I had to legitimately beat that guy. I think I saw it in the way that I wrestled. I really just turned it on. And, you know, I wasn't going to lose that match. I wasn't going to be the guy that dropped into consolation on that final round going into the finals. That was probably the most pressure I'd ever experienced in any wrestling match. Beyond any of the final matches was that semifinal match of my freshman year to get into the finals. And I look at that and I kind of understand. Looking back, I look, all 4 of the other guys are in my corner, you know, watching me. You know, they all won. They're in the finals, and I had to beat that guy. And let me tell you, after watching that match again, I had to beat 2 guys in that one. There was no doubt about it, because that guy did not want me going into the finals. And what happened, Marlins, I high crotched him down, and that was when you could still bow him. And I locked that bow up and I bowed him, and it was over.
I'll tell you, the other thing was these guys were 18-year-old freshmen.
Yeah, 18-year-old kid. Yeah,
true freshmen. I mean, they match after match through the whole year. They amazed me. Just their competitiveness.
Yeah, no one in my semis match was like, "Yeah, be ready, system. This kid's pretty good." It turned out to be the guy was a 2-time defending national champion at that weight. He didn't mention that, of course. And it was even worse because the night before we had to make weight on Saturday, and this was Sunday morning with the semis. So the night before,
Saturday morning. So the night before that, though, I had gone and ran and tried to make weight, and I didn't make weight till midnight. And then the NCAA pulled me in for a drug test, and I couldn't pee. I mean, I couldn't pee because I was so sucked down. I was like, I have no water in my body to do this urinal, you know. And I sat there till like 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning, slamming Gatorades and eating food and trying to get enough liquid so that I could take care of that test. So, and then next morning at 10 a.m., bam, we were back into the semis and wrestled, like I said, a 2-time national champion. And he took me down twice right off the bat. But his one mistake was choosing down in the second round.
I remember.
Like Marlin said, I'd put a saddle on that kid and I put the leg right in and just knocked the starch out of him, so that going into the third round, I actually got a takedown and won on riding time. Basically, it was a 1-point match, and it ended with him clinging to my leg on the out of bounds line. So I mean, it was almost a, could have had a takedown, grabbing a single leg, clinging to my leg as the time ran out, and then me falling over and almost dying.
I want to add one thing to James's weight cutting story.
Of course you do.
And because we all cut a lot of weight back in those days. But this is a story James and I tell each other almost every time we see each other. Is that tournament, Marlin had just drove us out and dropped us out in the middle of nowhere the day before the tournament, and just said, "Okay, we got to find our way back to the university." And we were both sucked, but James was so sucked down. He was out in the middle of Pennsylvania in March. There's still that dirty, nasty snow that's kind of along the highway. And James was so sucked up. I remember him kind of going over to the side of the highway, digging through that black snow to find a little piece of pure snow. But that's the mind state he was in, and how hard he had to get down to that 134. That's all I wanted to say. That's a story we always tell.
So thanks. It's probably good that he referenced that you cleaned off the dirty snow first.
Found some clean stuff.
I want to turn to Marlin just for a moment, because
sure.
Again, most of our listeners will be coaches or people that are in that area of life. So Marlin, in regards to your preparation and the team's preparation for this particular event, was there any shift in how you did things? Was it just status quo? How did you go into that championships that year in '89 to actually see those results of 5 guys going in and 5 guys walking away?
To be honest with you, we had 2 or 3 guys in the regionals that I thought should have gone to the nationals. And at that time, the conference was all California and us at that time. And we never won a vote. As it turns out, it was a phenomenal story, but there was probably 2 or 3 other guys that deserved to possibly go that took third.
Yeah.
Or even second, a couple of them.
Those wild card meetings, if yours were like ours in the Midwest, they were brutal. And guys horse trading and doing things that just didn't seem fair or honest.
Horse trading, yeah.
Anyway, it turned out great the way it was, and I'll never, nobody will ever that we know that was part of it will understand how successful it was. But the one thing that we didn't really change any training. We trained hard all year, and we took days off when we thought people were getting beat up, and that was enough. But I think one thing I'd like to talk about, I don't know if this is appropriate time, is what happened going to the tournament.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
It's this. We were supposed to be at the airport leaving like 7 a.m. in the morning, and Travis West never showed up on time. We had snow and ice on the plane. It was canceled. The flight was canceled for going to Pittsburgh. 2 hours later, we ended up heading towards San Francisco. And Tony and James can step in if they remember something differently. But we had no gear because all the gear was on the plane. The only gear that we had was Travis West because he showed up late. He's the only one that had gear. So we go to San Francisco when we find a workout area, and they let us get into it. I don't know how it happened. James and I were talking about that, but we got in there and they got to run on the treadmill and do some different things.
That's the beauty of Marlin. I mean, this facility was a nice facility. I mean, in downtown San Francisco, it was us and a bunch of trophy wives working out in a $1 million gym, but he could talk his way into anything. He schmoozed the owner into letting us go in and work out in this gym before we got on another plane.
Yeah, then we got on the plane later to go to Pittsburgh, and we got in late at night. We got our car, our van, one van, and we drove to the school and went to the security office to have us.
First, they lost our luggage.
Well, yeah, we got off, and that's right. No luggage came, so we had no luggage. That's right. We had no luggage except for Travis. And so we go to wait. They wanted to check their weight and get in a sauna. So we got in the sauna, and it was never heating up. And so we just went back to the motel. Well, they'd canceled our rooms.
Oh, I forgot about that.
They put 6 of us in 2 rooms. And that was our first day there. And the next morning, I got up, drove to Pittsburgh, PA, and went to the equipment guy and said, "You got any sweat gear I can get for my guys?" Because we had nothing. So I get some stuff there. I went to a sporting goods store and bought some rain gear so they'd have semi-plastic when it was still legal. But anyway, so I got that. I came back and these guys are in the motel sitting with towels around them naked in a sauna.
we had nothing. We had no gear, nothing.
Anyway, so that morning later, I had to go into Pittsburgh, pick up Rick Russell. He had come, and when I showed up, he had all the luggage there. So we go back, so the guys get their luggage, and that was just kind of the beginning of the story. I mean, we ended up moving to a different motel.
Everything that could go wrong did.
It just
you left out the most important part, Marlin, when you drove off the road in the middle of the night and went through the intersection. It could have all never happened. We're in the middle. We're all asleep in the back of the van. Marlin doesn't realize that it's a T. He thinks it's a cross, and he goes right through the intersection and goes right off out into. We go out into a field. That was the first night. So it could have all been over right then and there.
About 1 o'clock in the morning after a 12 or 15-hour day.
So that you talk about overcoming obstacles.
Yeah, but it went on and on for, I tell everybody there was no reason these guys not going to win because nothing went right the whole trip.
The NCAA wouldn't let us wear. That was the first year that the Just Do It came out, their campaign. The NCAA wouldn't let us wear our sweatshirts. Being from Oregon, we had Nike gear. They would provide us with shoes and running shoes, and they had provided us with a brand new white sweatshirt that said "Just Do It" in big black letters. And all 5 of us had those, and the NCAA was like, "Nope, you can't wear them." And finally, they said if we put a piece of tape over the Nike symbol, they would let us wear them.
And now athletes get paid for with name, image.
Yeah, you think about that. You think about the difference. Yeah.
I don't even want to be in that world.
You and me both, Marlin. Hey, we're getting a little long in the tooth. I don't want to cut this off too short, but bring us up to speed of where you guys are at today, what you're doing, if you have your hands in wrestling in any way, shape, or form, or any lessons that you learned from wrestling that you've taken on with you, and we'll kind of call it good from there. How's that?
Sounds good. Go ahead, Tony.
I'm currently the head coach at North Medford High School, which is one of the larger schools in Oregon. And I coach them, head coach of the men's and the women's. And I retired from wrestling coaching a few years back, where I was the head women's wrestling coach at Southern Oregon University. And so, I'm going to Sienna Ramirez, who just won the U.S. Open and the World Team Trials for Southern Oregon. She was the last girl I recruited to SOU, so now she's going to wrestle off in the Super Duel here coming up against Tamara, but she's got a tough match. But so I'm still coaching, and then I have a business, and I can see I'm up in the mountains right now. That's why I keep cutting out. I spend a lot of time in with my wife and our animals, and we travel around the country and our RV when we're not at home. And then I come back and I'm coaching at the high school there. So
we miss you, Tony. We do miss you here in Blue Springs. The short step
that's right.
had here,
and I just by chance I happened to live in Blue Springs, Missouri, where Mike is for about 16 years. And a funny thing, Mark, this is how our wrestling actually got back in those days. There was a gym in Blue Springs, Missouri, used to be called All America Fitness. And back in the day when I was still lifting a lot and training, I was in the gym lifting, and I had a Portland State shirt on, and I'm in Blue Springs, Missouri. Marlin James guy comes and goes, "Tony Champion?" And I go, "Yeah." And I'm like, "How would anybody know me here?" And it's because I had the Portland State, and it was Matt Cox. Matt wrestled for Mike at Blue Springs, and Matt wrestled for Central Missouri State. He was an All-American, and Matt's a big stud out there. And I think he's a head coach somewhere out there now too.
He's still an assistant, but he definitely is still coaching. He was my assistant for probably 15 years.
Yeah, great guy. But Mike, and I know Mike had that first class. Actually, last time I was in Blue Springs, is I brought the women's team out from SOU. We were wrestling in that tournament they have out there in central Missouri, and we worked out at Blue Springs High School. And Blue Springs, Mike did such a huge. That program is amazing. I can't tell you how many state championships you won out there, but you walk into that facility as first class. It's like a college level facility, and Mike's really respected out there in the wrestling community. Everybody knows him, and of course, he's wrestled all these NCAA ref Division I final matches. You always see him on TV, and of course, everybody knows who Haggerty is. So, yeah, I got lucky being out there in Blue Springs around him for all those years. So,
yeah, we enjoyed having you here, Tony.
Yeah.
James, Marlin, tell us kind of what's happening in your worlds as we wrap this thing up.
Once I hung up the shoes, I never looked back. I won 3 national titles, and I lost my last one, the last match I ever wrestled. So at that point, I had 2 kids and 1 on the way, and I was tired of being poor. I would have liked to keep training and maybe tried for the Olympics, but I was tired of being poor. So at that point, I don't have the mentality to coach. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of skills that I didn't have at that time. Even still kind of don't have because the kids these days. I just decided that, it was best for me to move on and then raised my boys. I had a successful career, kind of semi-retired now. I work part-time and take care of my grandbaby. I still go to the Oregon Wrestling Hall of Fame banquet with Marlin every year. But it's, to me, I was either all in or all out. I couldn't be in the middle. So.
Gotcha. Marlin, we've been crossing paths here of last few years at the different USA events and the NCAA championships, et cetera. So give us a little bit of backdrop on what's going on with you right now.
Well, we're sitting here in I call my shop, but it's actually Portland State history. When they dropped the wrestling program, they basically were throwing everything away, and I have everything here.
It's like a shrine to Portland State wrestling on every single wall.
I actually, in my office, have Rick Sanders' gold medal from the World Championships and a silver medal from the Olympics.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And people come, and there's a Rick Sanders bench that a guy made, and it has all his accomplishments and what he did. And I've had whole high schools come and sit and get pictures of him, and I have a wall that everybody signs. And I still get involved with wrestling as much as I can. I go to wrestling events. I helped coach a little bit at Warner Pacific last year, but it was dysfunctional. It was a bad scene for the kids. But I still reach out to like James and Tony and get everybody I can over here. And I have a lot of guys still coming and staying in contact. And we have a plan on trying to get wrestling back at Portland State. So.
Well, good luck with it. I know that the entire wrestling community would support that effort. So anything that we could do to ever help in that regard, run it through the Coaches Council. Let us know.
Sure.
We'll definitely try to put a hand in it and give you any leverage that we can. But I know that that's always been something that I've heard about. That's sort of like in the background, in the noise of the background. But it would be so marvelous to see the Portland program come back, the Oregon program come back. It's just one of those things that there's a huge void in our wrestling community without those guys out there.
And it's opportunities, right? The opportunities for the young women in that area to be able to go to college, participate in a sport that's given us so much, right, through these relationships. And Marlin, I've got to ask one last question. I'm a big fan of body language. I'm talking with Ivan Ivanoff the other day, and he said body language. He said it's very important in coaching. And so I'm watching you during the last hour of this podcast, and the arms are crossed. You're very relaxed. You're very calm. You're hearing these athletes that you had talk about their journey, talk about this very, very special moment in a career. But I wonder what it is that I'm seeing in you, that quiet confidence. I'm wondering where that comes from, and how do we get that? Can you bottle that up? Could you sell that?
I so many things in my life happen not by plan. And I think everybody thinks they're going to have a plan and do something. And going into the Army and being able to wrestle for the Army instead of being killed in Vietnam. The guy that changed my life, one guy, Grant Josie, who died in Vietnam, changed my life because he had my orders changed because he knew one person. And that one person was Ed DeWitt at the time, who was the Army wrestling coach. And I ended up wrestling for the Army instead of something else. And same thing going to Portland State. I mean, when I was in high school, I had a science teacher who said, Marlin, you're a good guy, but you shouldn't go to college. and she was, I wasn't ready. I graduated at 17. I wasn't ready, and I didn't. So I went to college 4 years later. So, and much more mature and much more ready for things. So, I can't say what. It just was never a plan. It's just that things happen. Being around Rick Sanders, Doc Westcott, and all my teammates, I had great teammates when I was wrestling. I just surrounded myself with somehow good people, and that's all I can say. So
he always has been this way as well. I will say, he's always been laid back, kind of calm, cool, and collected. He was what I lovingly referred to him as our travel agent, back in the day, because after the first couple of years, it was Anthony Amato who was running practices. So Marlin he'd be more of an administrator and setting up, travel schedules and setting up. But he's always had a kind of an easygoing, low-key attitude to him that I liked. That's, like I said, part of the reason I went to Portland State instead of Oregon State, Tim. And a credit to the Oregon Wrestling Youth Program that all of us were Oregon State champions. All 5 of us that won that national title that year were all previous junior national titleists and junior national wrestlers from the state of Oregon. There wasn't any outside talent. There wasn't any, recruiting going on from California or Washington or Idaho. We were all local born and bred, and that's from coaches like Marlin and many other coaches like Roy Pittman and Mark Sprague and all the other guys that we've mentioned in this podcast that, trained us all from our youth to fight, and to get out there and battle it. And he was a heck of a coach. I give Marlin a lot of credit.
Special community, special people.
I was going to say one more thing. Howard Westcott, there's a lot of Westcott stories, I can tell you, but and most of them he can't repeat. But he came to me when I got the head job and said, I'm going to give you some advice. And I said, what's that? He says, surround yourself with people who can do what you can't. And, that's a true story. Wrestling coaches generally think they're going to do everything. The best coaches are the ones that delegate good.
Yeah.
And because you can't do everything. And, in wrestling, it's just a wrestling world. Head coaches are out there mopping mats. We're doing that, and we're not delegating. And
that's right.
So it's something that, it hit me pretty good and it made sense. And I tried to do that. So
he used to wrestle with us when we were freshmen. He would come up to the room and wrestle. And I remember specifically the last time he came up was Tony put him in a bow and arrow and grabbed his leg and his neck and had his knee in his back. And I heard, oh!
I didn't do that to coach.
And after that, like I said, Anthony kind of took over as a operation.
Tony actually did that to Hank Shank, too.
Tony did it to a lot of people, if I remember. Well, gentlemen, I can't thank you guys enough. James, Marlin, Tony, for joining us. I think this is one of the best podcasts we've had, one of the most entertaining. I know that I got so much out of it. It's so great to see you guys. And I have so much respect for you guys individually and what you guys did back in the day. I wish that more people had a chance to witness it. Maybe some people will do a little more research after listening to this about what those teams actually did during those eras of the late 90s, early 80s, or late 80s, early 90s, et cetera. So again, thank you for joining us today. And Mike, any last words before we sign off?
No way I'm touching that.
Yeah. One last thing. I have lost. I don't know how I lost it, but I do not have the finals of that year.
Well, maybe
I have
somebody
it.
does.
Tony,
I have it.
There you go. There's a start.
Remember, Marlon? I sent you the copy of it, but you couldn't copy it because it was too rough and gruff.
Okay.
But I have it.
And I'm sure that some of our listeners may have some access to some things like that. And at any time, you can always reach out to myself or Mike Clayton and get that information to us. We can always share it in the show notes. And we appreciate those kind of comments. Anything that you would like to see in our Heads Up podcast, please bring it to our attention. So we're a little long in the tooth today, but definitely feel like it was worth the time, and it was well spent, at least for me, for sure. And Mike, good to see you again, brother. And guys,
Thanks, guys.
One last thing. I wish we could have had Broderick and Travis and Dan also.
Well, I actually sent Dan the link. I don't think he got it. So I messaged him. And Dan he's been living over in the Middle East, but I think he's back in the country right now.
Dan just celebrated a birthday. I saw that, and I reached out and said hi to him, and hopefully he'll get a copy of this, and maybe he'll add some to our show notes later too, so that we can extend some.
He won't be short of words.
No, he won't. No doubt. But guys, again, thanks everybody, and tune in next time for.
All right, thanks, guys.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Take care.
Goodbye.